Well, good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to St. Luke's. I'm the Reverend J.D. Koch. I'm the rector here, and on behalf of our congregation, we're so glad not only that we had the ability to do this, thanks to the Bowdens, but also your interest. And so we're looking forward to a wonderful afternoon of learning more about Marc Chagall and his amazing genius, and just welcoming you to our sanctuary. So I apologize, we're working on the air and the lights and the microphones. All these things, as the rabbi and I were remarking, fall outside of our doctoral studies. So there we go. But I will work on it for you. But until then, we just want to welcome you to St. Luke's, and I want to introduce Rabbi Bloom to come and we continue the program. There we go. Welcome.
Now, what do I do with this?
Just stick this on right here. I do know how that works. You got it?
Got it.
All right.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes. So?
I think the audio is recording here.
Yes.
Not as a speaker to all of you, so we're going to have to speak strongly.
Reverend Koch, I'm going to do the best I can. You're absolutely right. Our expertise does not rely upon or involved with audio, visual, or sound machinery.
You're doing great.
In doing the Lord's work. But let me just say this. I know that before I speak about Marc Chagall, from the angle that I'm going to take this, I think the most important thing that I'm going to say that supersedes this talk I'm going to give is related to all my friends from St. Luke's and Christians throughout the community that are here who are in the midst of the Lent season. And I know this is a season of reflection as you journey towards Jerusalem in preparation for Easter. May the spiritual practices you have engaged in and that you do, may these practices bless you and your faith. Amen. I want to thank Sandra Bowden, as well as Reverend Koch and St. Luke's Church for inviting me to address this group and for this amazing project, of which Sandra, I'm used to saying Sandra, I don't know why, that's how I learned. Okay. Has engineered. It started for me when I got a text from St. Luke's Emeritus, Reverend Greg Krantz, who texted me with an FYI. You should meet Sandra Bowden. And so then Jane Joseph and I came down to meet Sandra, and I want to say this at the outset, that she has done a tremendous service with this exhibition, not only to her own faith community at St. Luke's, but to the Jewish community, for inviting us and all to see the etchings and the lithographs of Marc Chagall, all meeting the entire Hilton Head community who are represented here today. These days, whenever we can find an opportunity together for education and friendship, it seems like this is a good sign about American culture and religion too in our society. You see, I believe that ecumenicism is needed more than ever here in Hilton Head, as well as in the nation. At the outset of my remarks, I should tell you that the second most important thing, besides wishing you a reflective and meaningful Lent season, the second most important thing is that I am not an expert on art, of any art, as an art historian. I am not. My wife, who's an all-but dissertation in art history, could present on the artistic career of Marc Chagall much better than I, but she lives in Washington, D.C. So my focus on Chagall will be more geared on what underlies the artwork today, which is Chagall's Jewish identity and how that might have impacted some of the major themes of his work. I'm more comfortable in that direction. and I would defer to Sandra as an artist and art historian herself. I say this because Chagall would not have taken kindly to be referred to as a Jewish painter per se. At the same time, his Jewishness, as it related to the small and intensely Jewish environment that he grew up in the Belarusian town of Vitebsk, however you want to pronounce it, which had a lifelong impact upon the themes of his life and upon much of his artwork, even though he certainly went beyond the confines of a shtetl community. What is a shtetl? A shtetl is a small Jewish town of mostly Jews, and so we call it a shtetl. And he has traveled all over the world and explored all kinds of themes that we all know about. Jews in Eastern Europe and Central Europe spoke Yiddish, and that is a Germanic language laden with Slavic linguistic influences as well as Hebrew. This was the mother tongue for Chagall, even though he lived for many years in France, and that was the professional language of the art world during the years of the late 19th and 20th centuries. There were other prominent Jewish painters during these decades, such as Pasquin, Modigliani. Pasquin's real name was Pincus, by the way. I talked to my wife last night. Do you know Jules Pincus? She started laughing on the phone. She says, no, it didn't work. It's Jules Pasquin. And I went, and Modigliani, just, you cannot fool a wife. It's just impossible. But we men just love trying. This is part of our joy of being men, to fool our wives and they just run circles around us. And many others, but Chagall really distinguished himself from the beginning to the end of his career in preserving the old Jewish world that he grew up in. The visual images, including the sights and sounds of a Jewish town in that part of the world where millions of Jews lived before the Nazis committed the genocide, which we call the Holocaust. Those memories, the language and culture of Jewish life, were instilled in him and used his great talent to preserve through painting, stained glass windows, pottery. He did everything. So many other venues that he used to capture the essence of that world, but in a modern context. That was his genius from a Jewish perspective. All of that world followed him wherever he lived and wherever he made art. It never left him, and you can see the influences of his work from that world, from the fiddlers on the roof to the rabbis he remembered who taught him Judaism in a school, or as known in Yiddish, cheder, as Jews called it back then. I think another point that I want to bring out at this part of my talk is that as much as he cherished the Jewish past and painted it in so many different ways, he broke through barriers in trying to find religious symbolism, not only from Judaism, and I say this for the benefit of our Jewish friends, but from the context of Christianity too, to incorporate those symbols, particularly the figure of Jesus, especially in paintings that depicted Jewish martyrdom and suffering over the Holocaust. He is not the only painter to incorporate Christ inside Jewish themes in their work. He is not. And neither is he the first. Yet he certainly caused both Jewish and Jews and Christians to question what would be the purpose and meaning of Christ's presence in these intrinsically Jewish themed paintings of pogroms and genocide of the Jewish people. What could be the reason for using Jesus in the way that he does? I might also add that Chagall was also looking for various themes in exploring his own Jewish identity that would reach out to a larger audience. For that reason alone, I conclude that his focus on biblical themes, which is what we see today, such as the ones in his lithographs we view today, belong to a vision of finding common ground between Jews and Christians. He was deeply connected to his Jewish roots, and that never left him. He produced religious art that can be found in Jewish institutions, as well as stained glass windows in synagogues and churches. Interestingly enough, for a man so dedicated to his Jewishness, despite the fact that he was totally secular, he was not what you would call a religious person. He didn't belong to a synagogue. And yet, despite that, in his strong cultural and spiritual roots in Judaism, his final resting place was in a Catholic cemetery in the south of France. I cannot pronounce French. My wife said to me, if you're going to do French, don't. Even though I could speak 3 languages, but you know how you all tell the husbands what to do? Okay, so I'm not going to say. It's St. Paul de Vence. One other point that deserves mention. Chagall understood well enough not only the precariousness of striving for success as a painter to going from being poor to a world-class celebrity in the art world, but he also was really tried and tested over many, many times through the years of his career. Why? He survived the Russian Revolution. He survived World War I. And being a refugee during the German Nazi genocide of the Jews during World War II. In those years, particularly, he dodged and escaped the regimes of the Vichy government in France, who almost captured him and would have sent him surely as they did send the French Vichy government, thousands of other Jewish people to Auschwitz and other concentration camps. He fled military conscription from the Tsarist army during the October Revolution in 1917. He contended with the Soviets after World War I, and he became a Soviet commissar for art in the region where he grew up. And let us not forget that earlier on in his youth, he escaped the pogroms propagated by the Tsarist regime of Tsar Nicholas. Clearly, he was a refugee multiple times in his life. And when you consider the enormity of the work that he created, you really have to stand in awe of someone who was a true survivor. So let's focus on a bit of his fascination with the Bible, both on the Jewish Bible and the Christian New Testament. Clearly, Chagall was able to combine both Jewish and Christian images together in his paintings. In the 1960s, he painted Jacob's dream. You remember from Genesis? Which included, when I looked at this painting, an inverted Jesus on the cross in the painting's upper part, while far beneath him, in the same painting, there's a painting of Abraham holding the knife over a bound Isaac from Genesis 22. As early as 1910, he incorporated Christian themes in his works, such as, and I'm quoting, one called The Holy Family, Madonna with Child, a drawing of the crucifixion, and one entitled Dedicated to Christ, later renamed Golgotha. It seemed to me that Chagall was interested in how Jewish history and scriptural history and Christianity interacted with each other. But even though Chagall had a fascination with the figure of Jesus as a suffering servant, it was not until the aftermath of the Holocaust that he and other artists began to develop that theme of Jesus in their work related to the death of millions of Jews. My reading of the history of Chagall indicates that he was struggling, like the other artists were, to grasp the enormity of the loss of life. 6 million, 50 million people died at the hands of the Nazis and all their allies. He and others saw Jesus, in my opinion, in a Jewish light, and that's something different. Seeing Jesus in a Jewish light, and wanted to communicate for themselves and for their audience in their artwork, first and foremost, that Jesus was a Jew. What the churches did and the governments did to the Jews was, in effect, as if they were killing him too all over again. Jesus was Jewish, and so many of Chagall's pictures portrayed Jesus in the traditional Jewish prayer garb of a talit, prayer shawl, and phylacteries, the leather straps that you've seen traditional Jews wear around their heads and their arms that they wear each day, as do I. Jesus suffered as a Jew, and my sense is that it gave Chagall, an artist like Chagall, a way of communicating to the world how Jews felt, and maybe that the rest of the world, at least the Christian world, would better understand by using symbols that they cherish to understand the enormity of the impact of those monstrous years. Even when, after World War II, Chagall continued to push himself and face challenging issues such as creating art for Catholic and other Christian religious institutions who offered him work. Considering the aftermath of the Nazi genocide against the Jewish people and humanity, Chagall wrestled with a matter of conscience as to whether his beautifying the walls and windows of churches whose clergy and parishioners were part of the betrayal of his people would earn him the scorn from Jews around the world. In the end, he chose the pathway to follow his own conscience when he wrote a letter to the first president of Israel, Chaim Weizmann, to ask him his opinion. Weizmann said, "Follow your conscience." And he did contribute beautiful art to Catholic churches. He also made beautiful art for the state of Israel. Most recognizable are his stained glass windows at what hospital? I feel like I have a Jewish choir here. Okay. In Jerusalem, and the tapestry and the other works hanging on the halls of the Knesset in Jerusalem. Altogether, his use of the themes of the Bible, like those you see before you today, are truly the central subject of the artist's language of communication in a post-Holocaust world. The Bible, in many ways, was his palette from which he drew and painted and designed a world for all humanity. The Bible is God's imprint. Can we share that together? That is the question. And he was ahead of his time in saying yes. And that's, in my opinion, why these are here in this church. Marc Chagall was raised as a strictly Orthodox Jew who eventually left that world, to become a world-class artist. While he left his hometown of Vitebsk and the medieval world of a strictly Jewish world that never left him. You could take him out of the shtetl, but you couldn't take the shtetl out of him. And that was why he was a success. He went, with artists, I always tell artists, whether they're music or visual, poetry, go with your strengths. He charmed us with his visions of mysticism, sages who dreamed of redemption, the blending of Jewish imagery and Christianity's Jewish Jesus suffered along with the Jewish people. He was a refugee all his life, but he reinvented himself in each country that he lived in, including New York. Yet his art and love of art followed him and grew with him. He took from the world with its pain and suffering and found sanctuary in the Bible to express all that life had given to him. So his lithographs seemed like a fitting place for exhibition in St. Luke's Anglican Church. I pray that they continue to inspire you and remind you that the roots of Chagall, the roots of his vision of a shared humanity in Jesus of Nazareth, come out of Judaism, and that we can share that respect for our traditions together. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
No, you don't even need me now. That was wonderful. In fact, some of the things I was going to say.
Don't say them.
Oh.
Say them again. Can you clip this, just your name tag?
Okay.
Is it red? Good. All right.
That was really wonderful, especially where he came from and how it influenced his work is remarkable. So some of those things were in my notes, so I'm going to wing it a little bit. Marc Chagall was born in 1887, and he died in 1985. He lived 98 years. That's why he was, one of the reasons he was such a prolific artist. And he is one of the world's foremost visual interpreters of the Bible for the 20th century. He holds a unique place in the canon of modern painters and printmakers. Chagall is a one-off. Marc Chagall in the Bible, this exhibition, has 10 etchings, which I've guided many of you down here to begin seeing the show with, and 42 lithographs, and 2 crucifixions and a couple other pieces of his work, and a historic poster that I bought when I was at the Chagall Museum. Now, everybody has said to me, where did you get all of these? How did you get all of them? Well, the only place I've ever seen all these together is Chagall Museum in Nice, and it's one of my favorite museums in the whole world. And I think I can tell you, I'll tell you a little bit about it at the end if I have time. So this exhibition started in 2010, and this is the 32nd venue, and it leaves from here and goes to St. Louis. And it's had a whole history of, I wish you had been at Duke, because this whole show hung in the chapel at Duke, not so far from us. And the religion department of that university, not the seminary who'd put it up, the religion department protested that there were 2 crucifixions. And the dean removed them from the exhibition. And I told the college about this woman who lives not too far from Duke, that she was Chagall's, she started the Chagall, Friends of Chagall for the United States, and she worked with Chagall the last 11 years of his life when he wasn't too good. I said, you know, she might like to come and speak. Well, the place was packed, absolutely packed. And she got up to speak. She's 87 when she was speaking, and she faltered a little bit because she had had surgery not too far before that. And she stood up there and says, well, today I'm going to speak about something I've never talked about before. I'm going to talk about why Chagall did crucifixions. And I was ready to go. And then this exhibition also was in a church in Mount Pleasant, Massachusetts. And you probably heard about 5 or 6 years ago about the Anglican church that burned. This exhibition in South Carolina. What did I say? Oh, yeah. You got to know what I'm thinking, not only what I'm saying. So this was in Mount Pleasant, South Carolina. The church burned, and this was on a Sunday, and the firemen said, absolutely nothing is coming out of here. Later in the day, one by one, the firemen removed 58 of the 59 pieces from the show, brought them out, and it was a church that ministers to artists particularly. They knew exactly what to do. They ripped them out of the frame, took them out of the mats, laid them on the table. Monday morning they called me. Tuesday morning I was there, and they had hired a restorer to come and meet me, along with the newspaper. And they have all been restored, and that's what you see here. Many of them are even in better condition than when I bought them, because I don't care about them being pristine. I care about the content and the narrative that these pieces live. So that's a little background on this one. It took me a number of years. I got quite a few, and then I decided I should put them all together, and I found a dealer in Sweden that I bought the last ones from. Well, the rabbi has shared with you a lot about Chagall's background, and it's important. His father, they were in from, I say Vitebsk, but Vitebsk would be better, and from Russia. His father was in the herring fish business. His mother ran a little grocery store. They were a modest family. I think he was the oldest of either 7 or 9 children. And it was a small town, and it was full of Jewish synagogues, but also Orthodox churches. Now, a young Jewish boy, Orthodox Jew, would not have access to too much art. I think his mother, from all we read, let him wander about town, and most of the art that he saw was in those Orthodox churches as a young man. He went to the Jewish schools, and then his mother took him out and had him go to public school. And it was there that he encountered art. So in 1907, with his mother's help, he went to St. Petersburg to study art. He was there 2 or 3 years, and he knew, wait a minute, the place to be is Paris. So in 2010, he heads to Paris. He spent long hours in the Louvre. And during that time in his painting, everything he did had to do with back in his hometown, just like you've heard from the rabbi. He couldn't get away from it. The symbols, the pictures, the people of his background, etc., found his way into the work. And, you know, he experimented with all sorts of things that were going on in Paris, you know, Cubism, Surrealism, the Fauves, but none of that really fit him. So it was important to him to have the world of the imagination. In Christian circles, when we say our creed, we believe in the seen and the unseen, the visible and the invisible. For Chagall, the invisible world was as real as the visible. So not as much in his biblical work, but in his other work that he did of all the lovers and the flowers. You know, people are floating through the air. In one of the pieces here, you'll see an ox flying. Gravity didn't hold him back in his world of his imagination. As I said, he was a school of one. He didn't fit, but he learned so much while he was in Paris. Then in 1914, he's done a lot of paintings now in Paris. So he is invited to have a show in Berlin. So he takes all the work and leaves it off in Berlin. He heads back to Russia because he has this woman named Bella that he's been in love with forever. And whenever you see Chagall or a woman and man and a woman together in his work, it's Bella. He loved her all her life, all his life, even after she was gone. So love was really important to Marc Chagall. So he goes back to Russia. He marries Bella. He's there till 1922. But he goes back to France via Berlin, and he goes to pick up his money or his painting. All the paintings have been sold. The money was deposited in the bank, but it was worth 0. So he left Berlin. This is another form of suffering he went. He left with no art and no money. And even in Paris, they found some of his work that was left in Paris, they found a doghouse constructed out of part of his paintings. The man lived through a lot. So he settled in France, continued work. Rumors of World War II were coming. In 1940, through the influence of his daughter, he urges her, you've got to get out of here, you've got to head south. So he heads to southern France. Well, the war is intensifying. He was in trouble, as you mentioned. He was actually jailed. And it was the American government and people at the Museum of Modern Art in New York who confronted the powers that be and said, you better not keep that man. The world won't let you forget it. So he was released and he came to the United States. And it was Matisse's son who met him and set him up in a gallery in New York. It was a struggle to fit there. He found his Yiddish community, but it was still a struggle. And then in 1944, he came, 4 years later, he's vacationing in the, what is it? It's north of New York, not Poughkeepsie, the Pocono Mountains. His wife gets a cold, gets something. She needs antibiotics. Antibiotics weren't available to everybody because it was reserved for the military, and she died suddenly, and he never got over that. He later on, even when he was married and whatever, when he would paint lovers, it was he and Bella. She stayed with him all his life, for sure. And I stayed in the United States for a while, and then in 1948, he returns to France. Now, we can look at, as the rabbi did, all the places he lived. And was he Russian? Was he French? Was he American? The most of all, for Chagall, he was an artist. That was his identity. And he offered the world a dramatic and very personal interpretation of the biblical narratives. He said that he did not see the Bible, but he dreamed it, even as a child. So he's given us these marvelous depictions. I have another quote. Since my earlier youth, I have been fascinated by the Bible. It has always seemed to me, and seems to me still, that it is the greatest source of poetry of all time. Since then, I have sought its reflection in life and art. The Bible is like a resonance of nature, and the secret is what I have tried to transmit. As the rabbi mentioned, he did paintings. Eventually, he did, through this show, after 1930, he did printing. But his work is all over the world. And from what I understand, yes, he was in synagogues, he was in churches. From what I understand, a church and a synagogue, he never took a fee for the design. They had to pay for everything. And there are marvelous examples of his stained glass. We were in a little church outside of London not too long ago. It's the only church in the world with only Chagall windows. And it's not as big, anywhere near as big as this sanctuary. But there are murals, you know, it just goes on and on. His work is so many places. Now, when I gave this talk before, I had slides, and you know, we could talk more about his symbols. In his more secular work, there are lots of symbols. I will give you a couple. Angels, for him, were not, they were a substitute for the image of God. A goat was a symbol of the atonement. Candles refers to the Sabbath. It goes on. He has those symbols, and we'll see them in his crucifixion image over here. But let's go to how this show came about. These etchings down here were 1930, they were begun. Ambrose Villard, the man who probably was responsible in the early 20th century for more publications of prints than any other person. Picasso, you name it, had suites of work that he commissioned. So he approaches Chagall and says, you know, I want you to do etchings of the Bible, 1930. So Chagall takes it, okay, he heads for Palestine. Notice it's Palestine. Israel wasn't in existence in 1930. And he goes there because he said, I wanted to touch the earth of the Bible. And then he says at the same time, I went back to the great universal book, the Bible. Since my childhood, it has filled me with visions about the fate of the world and inspired me to work. I see the events of life and the work of the art through the wisdom of the Bible. Since my inner life, the spirit and the world of the Bible occupy a large place, and I have tried to express it. Well, Villard died halfway through the project. And so that it was put on hold, but Chagall finished that suite. There are 105 pieces in that suite. I only have 10 in this show. They were picked up by a French publishing company, Tirade, and when they came out that same year, Tirade says to him, I want you to do lithographs for me now. And these 42 lithographs came out of that. And he had never done them before, but he said, whenever I bent over the lithographic stone, these are on stone, it's a wax resist method. It was as though I was touching a talisman. It seemed as though I could pour all my sadness and joys into it. Out of that came all of these luminous, wonderful prints that you have surrounding the sanctuary. And everyone has intense, beautiful color. That's what's so rich about these. These are very luminous. And that suite starts, I started it with the angels. Then on this side to my right is creation. It's the most wonderful blue piece that begins. Creation is sort of a vortex of things swirling around. That was his imagination. And then the story of Adam and Eve. You make your way down the sequence to Abraham. My favorite is Sarah and the three angels. The reason for that is my first granddaughter was named Sarah. And then we make our way to Moses, and there are, I think, 4 Moses. One, he's receiving the tablets. The other, he's bringing them down. They seem light, but there's a red one down there where he's furious. Look at his face. He's furious because when he came down the mountain, they had the altar, and they were worshiping. They weren't worshiping God. So that's how he expressed his Moses. And it's interesting, in these 42, how many women. Chagall had a love of the women of the Bible. Adam, Eve, Sarah, 3 or 4 pieces. We make our way over here. Ruth and Naomi are big. And then we come to David, and there's the wonderful piece of David playing the harp. He's king. He has the crown on his head. That's the same David that killed Goliath. And then we come down to perhaps the most famous piece here, David and Bathsheba. Their heads are fused. David is looking at us. Bathsheba turns to the side. And there are angelic forms above. Why did he include that? The story of David and Bathsheba isn't one of David's best moments. But I suspect that Chagall was a romantic, and I bet he saw David in the light of some of that. And he knew that David had asked for forgiveness. And so I tell you, many times Chagall pictures himself and Bella with those fused heads. So it's an image of love. Then the next place I'd want to mention is the Chagall 2 crucifixions here. One is the mystical crucifixion, and that really harkens back to his little town. It has a lot of elements in it. There's a candlestick in there. I think there are only 3. Chagall didn't care. Somebody asked me about the menorahs out there. How many candles on a menorah? I said, Chagall sometimes put 2, sometimes he put 5, sometimes he put 3. He didn't really, it was a candlestick, and it represented light, it represented God, it represented the Sabbath. He wasn't too concerned about that minutia. That crucifixion down there has a Madonna and child. Now, not only did Chagall recognize that Jesus was Jewish, that's why his loincloth is a prayer shawl. He, I think, believed that Mary and the baby were Jewish mother and child too. And so he saw it in that light. I think the rabbi did a very good job in explaining what the crucifixion meant to Chagall. And for me, I understand it offering suffering. Yes, that's the main part of it. But when you go to the Chagall Museum, and that's one of my favorite museums, as I told you, at the end of his life, he painted 17 huge paintings that tell the whole story of the Old Testament. In the creation panel, the first one, God is creating the sun, etc., but right beside that is Christ carrying the cross, and then Moses receiving the tablet. Somehow he saw Jesus as part of this whole history. And when we get to the Abraham and Isaac painting in this, Christ is above with a cross. I think that Chagall recognized the suffering, but also somehow the relationship, the New Testament and Jesus, with the idea of sacrifice. Now, and there's another little crucifixion down here called Christ and the Clock. Did you see it? The face has a clock on it. Now, that clock clocks represented time to him. Time with no end, no beginning. So it's eternal. But what you need to really look at above that, it didn't say Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. It said Moshe, Marc Chagall. His name was above it. Because he had gone through suffering. As the rabbi said, he never had to fight in the war, but he had to know what it was to be refuged many times and have a difficult life and a life of suffering. So that one plays a little role in helping us understand it. Well, my hope is that, it's been wonderful watching you all come in. And you are looking, you're reading, and I hope to God you are seeing. There's a difference between looking and seeing. The reason we collect religious art is because I want the church, particularly, to not only read the Bible or hear it, I want them to see it. And you've seen it today in a new light. My hope is that this exhibition will inspire many of you to come a little closer to God, especially as you move toward Passover for some of you and toward Easter for others. Thank you.